morning. So it's just under a week since the ride London, and I'm out really just on a recovery ride. It's only going to be 20 miles just to kind of turn my legs over, but I wanted to use this ride to really give my opinion on the event last weekend, and you know, my kind of thoughts on it. There's been, looking on some of the social media, there's been some fairly negative comments about it, which has made me think about certain elements of the kind of ride and the organisation of it, which I just wanted to give my opinion kind of for what it's worth. So I will get off this busy road, get onto a bit of a quieter road, and I'll give a breakdown of my thoughts of how it went and how it was organised. So I will speak to you in a bit. I'll see you in a bit. See you in a bit. So I think firstly, I need to kind of talk about the logistics of the event, sort of getting there and getting home. As with a lot of these kind of big rides, these big organised events, it's very easy to kind of get a place on them and plan for the actual ride without actually putting as much planning into how you're going to get to the start line, and more importantly how you're going to get home. A lot of the sportives I do, it's a lot easier because I can put the bike in the car, drive to the event, do the ride, and then get home. But obviously when you're starting in central London, it's a little different, and with the rail strikes and everything else going on at the moment adds to that kind of difficulty as well. But fortunately it was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. Contrary to what I'd said a couple of times on the Ride London video, I didn't get dropped off at Finsbury Park, I got dropped off at Regent's Park. So we loaded the car up, or I loaded the car up the night before. It was a very early start. We were up at 3, left the house at 4, drove down to Regent's Park, which is it's a piece of cake to get to, straight down the A1 and then off through Hendon and sort of into North London. Parked up, got the bike out, I set off, and then Mrs B and Dan drove the car home. So that element couldn't have gone easier. Blimey, it's windy along here. And then coming home, I'd had every intention of just riding out to King's Cross anyway from London Bridge, which is what I eventually did. So although I was pretty tired by then because I'd done a lot of riding, I think in total for the day I'd done about 110 miles with the ride from Regent's Park to the start, and then the ride, and then sort of riding back to King's Cross. But again, it wasn't difficult, you know. I got back to King's Cross, got the bike on the train, and so logistically this was probably one of the easiest ones I've done. So yeah, so that's one tick in the box there for me. It was something that I was originally getting quite nervous about, but proved to be quite easy. So it kind of leads me on to the rolling start. So the rolling start, obviously there were 20,000 riders participating on Sunday, so that takes a lot of organising to get everybody out onto the route. I had a start time, an official start time of 7:30, but I'd ridden down from Regent's Park quite early, and I was in the start queue I think about 6 o'clock, 6:15, that there was a lot of stopping and starting, and unfortunately we were held, myself and the group that I was with were held in the shade for probably about half an hour, which wasn't ideal because we were starting to get really cold. But again, what they did, they had, I think, 4 or 5 different start queues, which they kind of alternated a rolling start from. So they'd let the riders build up, and then they'd let them go, and then they'd let the next line go, then the next line, and so on. So again, there was a bit of waiting around, but that's kind of expected when there's so many riders participating in an event. That, you know, it's just not feasible, and you know, it's not practical, and I don't think it's actually possible to allow 20,000 riders to start at the same time. So again, I didn't really have a problem with that. I thought that was a good idea. It was very well organised, and got us down to the start line pretty quickly. So I think the only minor complaint I had about the whole start process was by the time I actually rolled down to the start line, bloody Ant and Deck were playing Let's Get Ready to Rumble. I mean, given the choice, I wouldn't have started a 102-mile bike ride with them two, but you know, that was out of my control. But no, you know, joking aside, the start process, couldn't fault it. So on to the facilities. So obviously when you're riding 100 miles, or for me when I'm riding 20 miles, I usually have to stop and have a wee. There were loads of porta toilets, whatever you want to call them, along the route, and obviously Essex is a massive toilet as well. I am only joking. Essex was a beautiful county, or it is a beautiful county, but it's very rural, that route, pretty much like riding out here. So even if you're not near one of the official toilet areas, you know, for us men who are very fortunate to have the functionality to, we can stop, find a bush or a hedgerow and get in there. You know, it's not ideal, but it's you know, facilities wise, the route was very, very well serviced with sort of toilet stops and everything else. So another plus point, which then leads me on to the route itself. So I think this is the biggest reason for a lot of the complaints and a lot of the kind of gripes on social media. Originally, when the Ride London started, it followed the original Olympic route out through South London and into Surrey. So it went up over the Surrey Hills, so Box Hill and Leith Hill, which have got a huge degree of provenance in cycling. They're kind of very well known and respected climbs on Strava. You know, that area, because of the association with the Olympics, that route was seen as the kind of the golden route and the one to ride. I don't know why, but they changed it to the Ride London Essex, which is the one I did, which obviously comes out through up to Braintree and sort of Chelmsford that way. And a lot of people, you know, it put a lot of people's noses out of joint. I think they wanted to ride the Olympic route and kind of have that association, which I understand, but in itself, I personally really enjoyed it. I think, you know, as much as I did joke about Essex just a second ago, Essex is a beautiful county. We were going through some awesome villages. The roads themselves, in most parts, were really good, really smooth rolling tarmac. It was an incredibly fast route, and you know, there were a few sketchy parts. There was one section of road which was kind of really gravelly, like it's almost like they'd scraped the top surface off of it and just put this loose sort of shingly gravel down, which wasn't ideal, but that was only a very small section of the route. So, you know, the majority of it was really good, and it led to some really good cycling for me anyway, you know. And I think the countryside and the majority of that route was very reminiscent of riding out this way, so it kind of suited my my riding and my preferences, as in lack of hills. So yeah, again, I can't really complain about the route. It was very well signed. I mean, it was a closed road event, so it didn't really need to be signposted, and I was following the Garmin as well, mainly not for it to tell me where to go, mainly so I could see the turns and the bends that were coming up, because obviously when you're riding with a lot of people, you need to be aware of what's around you as well as aware of what's coming up, which leads me on to my next point. All the other riders on the route. When you're riding an event like that, or any sportive, it's inevitable that you're going to be kind of fairly bunched up with other riders. The Ride London was well, it was the biggest event I've ever ridden, and you know, I think it kind of goes hand in hand with that you've got 20,000 riders, so there's going to be bigger groups of people riding along the same section of road. In itself, for the majority of the ride, didn't really present me any issues. I had to kind of pull on the brakes a few times quite urgently, because of, I think, the knock-on effect of people braking ahead and slowing down for kind of corners and roundabouts and stuff like that. But it didn't cause me any issues at all. You know, unfortunately, I did pass, I think, 3 or 4 accidents, one of which was probably about 3 miles from the end in the Limehouse tunnel, which did look quite bad. There was an ambulance there at the bottom of the tunnel, and somebody was sat on the side of the road. Fortunately, they seemed to be, you know, they were conscious, so but they were holding their arms, so they probably had an arm or a collarbone injury. But I think, you know, statistically, again, unfortunately, when you've got that amount of people riding, it's inevitable that you're going to have accidents. But I thought it was really good. I mean, I certainly had to be more aware of what was around me and who was around me, and kind of covering the brakes a bit earlier than I would normally, and maybe sort of, with it being such a fast route, just being aware of having to scrub some of that speed off if I needed to. But in all, I thought it was a great crack. You know, there was quite a bit of banter between the riders. I was having conversations with people as I was riding along, so, and that's how it should be. So yeah, it was really good. So it leads me on to my next point. So that leads me on to the refreshment breaks, or the, as they called them, the welfare stops. So there were 4 of these along the route. I can't remember the exact mileage of them, but I think they were roughly at about 26 miles, 52 miles. I think there was one around the 78, and then there was one around the 86 mile mark. So I only used 2 of them. I stopped at about the 50 mile mark, or just over 50 miles, and I stopped at around the 85 mile mark. Only really the first stop was really just, I was just over halfway, and I just really wanted to stretch my back, stretch my legs. So I pulled into the welfare stop. It was absolutely massive. I mean, there were loads of riders there. Facilities looked to be really good. I didn't use anything, because I just literally laid on the grass for a little bit, stretched out, caught up on some messaging on my phone, had a drink, a couple of flapjacks. I had planned to stop, but I'd also planned to take enough food and fluid with me to kind of get round. So I didn't really use any of the facilities at the first stop. As I say, I just really used it as an opportunity to have a stretch and kind of just have a few minutes off the bike. The last one that I used, which was the last official stop, was where I topped to bottle up. Again, the facilities were really good. It was a much smaller setup, but there were loads of kind of options for energy drinks, and I think they had energy bars there as well, in every flavour you could imagine, as long as you were imagining they were orange. So it was there was a lot there, but the choice was very limited, which is understandable. I mean, you know, they're not going to lay on every flavour under the sun. But so I filled one of my bottles up. I actually took 2 950ml bottles with me, which is unusual. I mean, they're bigger than I would normally take on a ride, but I didn't really want to have to stop too much. Along the route, there were loads of people handing out bottles of water. I mean, it was really well supported along the route. A lot of the towns and little villages, and even along some of the kind of country lanes that we went through, some of the houses, there were people out in deck chairs. I even passed the care home, where a lot of the elderly residents were out waving and cheering on, which was brilliant to see. You know, it was such a buzz going round. So that then, talking of support, leads me on to, so the support I had was absolutely brilliant. On the day there were Team Bracey, so massive shout out to the lovely, awesome Mrs. B for firstly driving, or kind of doing the driving at that time in the morning and driving back from London, and Dan for sitting next to his mum and accompanying her on the way back. Really appreciated that. Obviously they come down into London afterwards with Jade, Ian and Lizzie, and they met up with Steve, so I had those guys to kind of greet me at the finish line, which was absolutely amazing, and to cheer me on. You can actually see them in the video, but I didn't know what side of the bridge they were, so what side of Tower Bridge they were, so I didn't really know where to look out for them, but I did capture them on video. So yeah, that was absolutely brilliant. And also for Karina, H and Cameron and Steve as well, for following me on the app. Really appreciate that, and the messaging on the way round was it did genuinely mean a lot. I'll come to that in a little bit, but yeah, I mean, that support really did kind of motivate me and inspire me to kind of carry on, because yeah, it was quite a tough route, to be honest. But so yeah, and also the support from people who have donated to the Alzheimer's Society. that link is still open. It's still on this video, so if you do want to donate, obviously any money would be massively appreciated. But yeah, so the support was fantastic, really needed, certainly in the last few miles, to see some of the messages that I was getting. Obviously I didn't stop too many times to get my phone out. I was sending, obviously on the group WhatsApp, and those who are in it will know, I was sending regular updates, but well, when I say regular, I mean I sent about 5, but yeah, I did at some of the rest stops, I did check my phone and check my messaging, and you know, the support was fantastic, so I really do appreciate that, and I want to thank everybody who did message me while I was out and kind of cheer me up and cheer me up a bit. So, which leads me on to the next point. So the route itself, as I've said already, the route itself, it was challenging for a couple of reasons. I mean, obviously it's the longest route I've ever done, 102 miles. Physically, I felt really good. I'd put a lot of miles in prior to the event, so I knew I was going to feel pretty good anyway. My legs felt fine, the bike just felt amazing. I wasn't sure how I was going to cope wearing the Alzheimer's kit for that amount of time, because as you can see, I'm back in my Altura, my trusty Altura gear. But the Alzheimer's kit was fine. I mean, I must have a backside like an old school satchel, because I didn't have any issues at all. So, and plus I'd ride the Cellitalia saddles as well, so you know, obviously I'm not sponsored by them, I'd love to be, but I've ridden Cellitalia saddles for years on a lot of the bikes I've had. Really rate them, so comfortable. But the issue that I had on the route was more the kind of mental challenge of riding that mileage. And it didn't really hit me, to be honest, until I got to about the 90-mile mark, probably 95 miles. I could see the London skyline on the horizon, and it just wasn't getting any closer. And I genuinely found that really tough, probably more than I would have expected, to the point where on the way back, as we went into the Limehouse Link tunnel, certainly coming out, it was a real pull coming out of that tunnel. And there were a lot of people pulling up and kind of pushing the bikes up, and I think seeing that as well was really hard. I mean, I didn't get off. I carried on riding, just kind of dropped the gears, carried on riding, got to the top of it, got out the tunnel. I pulled over to one side and sort of stood over the bike just to really have a bit of a chat with myself and kind of G myself up, and then got back on and kind of got back to the finish line. But once I'd finished, I think the whole emotion of the event, it was a massively overwhelming, for me, it was massively overwhelming elements of that. The support along the side of the road, the support from you guys messaging and following me on the various social media platforms that I'm on. And also, I think just because I was right on the limit, by the time I'd got to the end, I was kind of running on empty. And I think just the fact of finishing and getting the medal round my neck was massively overwhelming, and I'm not ashamed to say that you know, it did really hit me once I'd sat down, and it just kind of really washed over me, and you know, I just kind of broke down a little bit. But it was all good, and you know, it was kind of through exhaustion really. But it was really good, as I say. It was really well supported. So I can, you know, I'm forever indebted to you guys for that. That was, you know, it was brilliant support. So I think it leads me on to the final point. So I think the last point really needs to be the question, would I do it again? The route was really good, I thought. The organisation was really good. You know, to organise an event of that magnitude, going out, certainly in central London and going out into Essex as well, takes a lot of organising. Yeah, there were probably things that I thought could be done a little bit better, but they didn't really ruin the day for me. It was a massively enjoyable ride, brilliant event, huge achievement. So I think ultimately the time has come for the big question, would I do it again? Definitely!